Very often our dads are seeking support, so USAAA is looking for a way to create that support. Thank you. To create that support and to give fathers a voice. So we're very grateful to our fathers that are with us here tonight. We also have a self-advocate here who is going to give us a perspective on some of the things that he thinks maybe would have helped him in his childhood in relationship to his father. So we'll start off, starting down the line here, introducing our panel, and we'll start with Stephen Shore. Stephen, if you could introduce yourself. Phil, we're going to have you pass I'll pass my mic here.
That way?
Well, just between the two. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, about 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I'm Stephen Shore, and I am my own autistic adult. And while I'm not a father, I do have a lot of experience having a dad. So I decided to share my experiences with you. I was diagnosed at 2.5 and was considered too sick to be treated on an outpatient basis. Fortunately, my parents advocated on my behalf and convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that they implemented what we would today refer to as an home-based intensive early intervention program. They didn't have terminology such as early intervention or sensory integration or even music therapy in those bad old days. But that's what they did. And now here I am in front of you. I divide my time between teaching and researching on autism at Adelphi University as a professor, traveling around the world talking about autism and consulting about the subject, writing books. I got 4 books out in the bookstore. I guess maybe the best thing to say is that I'm the dummy who wrote Autism for Dummies. And then during the whatever spare time I have, I give music lessons to kids with autism. So that's what I do. On to you.
Thank you, Stephen. All I can say to what I just heard about you is, wow. My name is Michael Zeitlin, and I am a father of a 21-year-old with autism. So I'd like to be in the next room finding out about what you do when your kid is 21 years old. But here I am, having lived the last 19 years with autism. My son Ryan has what's known as regressive autism. So until he was 2, we had no clue that Ryan had autism. He didn't seem to have autism. He was engaging. He was engaged. His mother responded to the ad that's on the radio that says, call 1-800-ABCDEFG, and they would send you flashcards to teach your child the alphabet. So when Ryan was 2, she sent away for those flashcards, and they arrived in about 30 days. She sent them back because in that 30 days he knew the alphabet. And he before very long, at the age of 2, he was reading first he memorized the children's books, and then he didn't have to memorize them because he was reading. And just before the onset of autism, I was at my aunt's house one day, and her nephews, my little cousins, were over, and they were 7 years old and 10 years old or so. And my aunt had a children's book, about a 2nd grade book or so. And Ryan, who was 2, picked up the book and he started reading it out loud. And the 10-year-old remarked, "Ryan reads better than I do." Well, maybe a week or so after that, it all went away. Ryan never read again. He stopped looking at people. He stopped being interested in books and stopped watching TV and stopped doing all of the normal things. And it started into having severe autism, which he has to this day. Um, I'm a CPA. That's my profession, and it's been my lifelong profession. And I've been involved in charitable boards for a very long time, since about the mid '80s. And I had a dream that I would, so early on when Ryan had autism, we didn't know we didn't know where to turn, we didn't know what to do. And there wasn't an internet at that time, or there was hardly an internet, because this is 19 years ago. And we just were dumbfounded about what to do, and we found nothing. And so I had a dream that there should be some organization, somebody that you should be able to call and to help direct you, send you in the right direction. About 6 years ago, I was invited to an event put on by the Autism Society of Colorado, and at that time I found out that there already was an organization that helps people in Colorado and Denver who answers the call, the Autism Society of Colorado. And as soon as I found out about it, I immediately asked to join the board, because I no longer had to invent that organization. And about a year later, I became the president, and I was president for 3 years. And I graduated as president late last year, and now I'm still on the board of directors of the Autism Society of Colorado, and I'll pass on to the next person.
Hi, I'm Philip DeMio. My son is a beautiful little 12-year-old with autism. The story is actually similar to Michael, very severe regressive. Before that, he was reading, he was brilliant. And then at 18 months old, we lost him. And so we've gotten part of him back. We love him. He's a great kid. He called me the other day. I work by splitting my time doing biomedical treatment for autism at my medical office, and I still work at the hospitals. I'm a boarded ER physician. I'm giving the talk on Sunday morning of what you do in a medical emergency with your child and what pitfalls there are and special things you need to know medically. So that's on Sunday. Well, I was at the ER, and my son called me the other day, and he wanted me to sing because, I used to sing lullabies to him, and I did them in different languages, and one of them's in Spanish. So I just gotten off the phone with a surgeon who's kind of a horse's backside on a good day, and then I went to this phone and I started singing to my son, and then it's in the middle of the ER and everybody was kind of listening. I was trying to sing kind of lowly, like, ay, 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 ay. So I was singing this thing, and then I got off the phone and they said, "You sang that to Dr. So-and-so?" I said, "No, it's my son, and I don't have to make Dr. So-and-so mad by singing. That happens." But Daniel's a great kid, and he's our drive to what we do, and he's my inspiration to be here. I have the privilege of working with Teresa Wrangham and Dr. Larry Kaplan, being the chief medical officer of the organization. And most of the time, I'm always in my mind is the fact that I'm Daniel's dad, and it drives me. And he's our one and only. So I also want to give apologies that my wife could not be here. She works for Frontier Airlines, and we're from Cleveland, and so she's an executive that runs the East Coast part of their sales force. So she wasn't able to be here. Otherwise, she'd be in the room tonight. I also want to thank Teresa Wrangham for setting up and running this panel. She does a great job. Thank you.
I'm Christopher Gauthier. I guess I'm the newcomer on this panel. My daughter Madeline is 6 years old, and I can easily say that it was not regressive. She came out that way. She came out kicking and screaming and fighting, and I had never imagined a baby being born like that. She was intense from the get-go. Within the first month and a half, she was trying to stand in her crib. It didn't take very long before she was actually out of the crib. And we're not talking 2, we're not talking 18 months, we're talking a little before 12 months. She has been full throttle her whole life. And our son Caleb, who is almost 5, actually in 4 days, he'll be 5. It was different. He came to us very quiet, very subtle. and wouldn't look and would always hide, and the hand in the eye, and wouldn't respond to auditory engagement. Even if he was in a crisis, you could call his name and he wouldn't look, he wouldn't engage, he wouldn't come to us. My poor wife over here is starting to choke up right now. And in fact, I've got a video that I yesterday did a webinar for the CDC and showed them the kinds of things that parents see, with these really young kids. And I think we're lucky because in many ways we did a lot of very active, very early interventive things like floor time, play therapy, changing of diets, biomedical intervention, and just have continued to keep up on it as much as possible. And our kids are in schools with neurotypical kids, but I wouldn't say that they're neurotypical by any stretch of anybody's imagination. And I'm waiting for the first grade teacher to finally go, Maddie's a little interesting. Yeah, they keep saying, she's so sweet. Yeah, she has echolalia. She's really great. She mimics, like a little parrot. She's fabulous that way, but no, she's not neurotypical. And like Philip said, these guys are my drive to do what I do. I teach, for my career, I'm an assistant professor of photography at Utah State University. The photographs on the panel just behind here are actually my research work. And the body of work was literally generated out of an understanding as a parent that many parents who first come into this feel lost. And we need to know we've got to network together. And I didn't see any visual representation that was iconic for this particular thing in society. Look at the history of photography and look at the migrant mother, for the Great Depression. It's pivotal, it's seminal to making these decisions. There's been tons of photographic work across history that have really changed cultural trajectory. And so I felt like it was my responsibility to give back my gift to a community that could really use it. And in a way, because I'm a father and I'm a parent who's really driven to do this. That's about all I can say.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Scott Wrangham, and Chris, you say this is your first time here. Well, this is also my first time on a panel, and even though I might have a few years on you, I can tell from listening to the other panelists here that they've certainly got the leg up on me on speaking in front of audiences and having the gift for gab. I have a 22-year-old daughter with autism. She's technically PDD-NOS, and she was echolalic in her early years, and but we gave her speech therapy and other treatments, and she has progressed through the years, and now goes to Front Range Community College, which we're very proud of. I also have a 19-year-old neurotypical daughter who's standing in the back of the room, we're very proud of. And of course, I actually have the honor of being married to Teresa Wrangham, who has been president of the Autism Society of Boulder County and sat on a number of other boards. And as Michael was saying, he kind of, he was on the ASD board, and I haven't had to do nearly as much because I've relied on my wife, who's done a fantastic job. So I'll leave it there.
Big brownie points to all the husbands up here. I just want to say, I guess what impresses me about our whole panel is how humble you are, because I know most of you, or I've read a little bit about you, and you guys are all so incredible to even be here giving to us, so thank you. I think the first question I'd like to toss out to all of you, and Stephen, you could take it from the perspective of an individual who grew up with autism and had a relationship with your dad. When you first got that diagnosis, I think the diagnosis happens at a range of ages. If you felt that made a difference, when you got that diagnosis, and how did you cope with it? What was your first thought around your child has autism and it may mean X, Y, and Z? and where did you look for support? Let's start back this way. Scott, go ahead and go first.
Yes, I remember that day very well, being with the doctor and getting the diagnosis of autism, and then the doctor telling us that, to go see a specialist. And my reaction was probably a little atypical. I was actually a bit relieved because now we had a label. Now it wasn't unknown anymore. It was something that you could define, and then you could try to solve and find treatments and work towards making the situation better. I can honestly say that was not the reaction of my wife at the time. A typical mother was a little upset, but for me, like I said, I saw it as a first step to being able to progress and provide treatment for our daughter, which has worked out.
I think for me it happened in 3 stages. The first was when Madeline was extremely young, and Jackie was talking to her mom on the phone about Maddie's progression and development. And my mother-in-law, as I would say, no negative to her, accused my daughter of having autism. And I say that because I was angry and I was upset and I was terrified, because all I knew about autism was the horrible, negative connotations that go along with it. And I was thinking, oh my God, this can't be true. I can't lose my daughter. She's the world to me. And I don't know that I got over that for a long time. And probably about a year later, Jackie had Maddie with a neighbor, a little play group, and a dad came by to pick up his daughter out of the play group, and he happened to be one of the social workers for the state of Mississippi, where we were living at the time, for their autism analysis group. And he just asked Jackie if he could very quickly just do an ADOS on her, on Maddie. And he said, there are clearly some red flag concerns here, and you really need to take her in and have her fully assessed. And so I was in the garage at the time preparing a body of work to be shipped off to a museum on the East Coast, and she came back and just sobbing, crying, and I'm thinking, what's going on? What happened? And Maddie's in tow. And so Jackie came back and talked to me about what she had heard, and I thought, I don't need this right now. I just got over this feeling I had first off with your mom. I don't need this right now, but okay, I'll take care of this. I'll help Jackie get through this. It didn't mean I was in denial. It just meant that I wasn't ready to digest it. But over the period of another year, when we finally moved to Utah, and the reason we left Mississippi from Utah was there was no support for autism. Literally, the state had hacked the entire program. The health department basically had been gutted because of corruption. And Utah State University had a fabulous early intervention program, and it has one of the best photo programs in the country. And I'm like, oh, this is perfect. So I took the job. And we immediately got her into early intervention. And there was a huge change. And yes, when we had the diagnosis come back as PDD-NOS, it was a graduate student who delivered it to us. And I thought, well, yeah, she has PDD-NOS. By that time, I had had enough time to digest it. Part of my deal is I'm an artist, and I have to live with artwork and understand it, relate to it. And I had to live with my daughter and understand her and relate to her. And she has told me a lot about myself, by watching her and her development. And so when our son came along, it was a very smooth transition. It just made sense that this was happening for him. And I'm more, I wouldn't say I'm more willing to accept him over her. It's just different because she was the one who rocked that boat initially. And they're very different little creatures. One is very volatile, one is very calm, but then he can explode, and she can be really volatile and get amazingly calm. So that's a little more than I ever wanted to say.
That's that whole whirlwind that parents go through, and sometimes it's a slow whirlwind.
And I think a lot of us in the room know about that. It's an irony and a dichotomy. It's a very strange thing. And often, each of the two parents, either in the beginning or somewhere in the middle or somewhere at the end, I think, I'm not pontificating, I think a lot of us go through this, are in two different places about how they see this and what they're feeling and what they see. I remember with Daniel, he's our only child, and I remember looking at his picture. My wife was upstairs, and we both made the diagnosis really because no one was helping us the right way, and that's not a criticism, it's just a fact, the way this happens. And there's unfortunately a lot of reasons why that is in our country and the way this is, but that's just what it was. And I remember she was upstairs for a minute with him, going through the nightly, what did you call it, Chris, full throttle or whatever it was, and he was just always a handful of, and very needy, very hard baby. And he was around 18 months when this all happened after his vaccinations, and that's the way it was with him. And I looked at his picture where he was bright and on all fours looking up at the camera, and it was very neurotypical on that picture. Cute little thing, and it was probably making some comment or something and then crawling along and getting a toy and standing up and doing something else brilliant after that. And then it's as if he was in a storm drifting away, and it's just a very strange feeling, and of course it was very sad. And then fast forward to probably about 4 years later, I was asked by a friend of mine who's also got a child on the spectrum, how do you think Daniel felt at the time? And I had never once thought of that. Not once. How did he feel about losing his connection to everybody? And how did he feel about being unable to express himself the way he was 2 weeks before that? Very abrupt in his case. And what do you think he was going through, And it really was a sort of a shocking way for me to have to think, to get outside of my way of thinking and think of what it was like for him. And for his mom, it was just, she was a very driven executive person. I mentioned that. I don't think she ever thought she was going to have kids. And then we met each other through some friends we had, and we ended up obviously falling in love and getting married. And I'm from the big, loud Italian family, where everyone's reaching over each other's food while half the food's gone before you sit down. Everyone's yelling and screaming the Italian intercom, without having to, even TV's blaring, there's noise all over the place. She's from this prim and proper family that prints out everyone's place for Thanksgiving dinner 2 months ahead of time with laminated multicolors, and everyone's quiet and they stop talking when someone else says something at the table, and she never thought she'd ever really, I think once she got into her job, there was a point where I think she just decided it was just probably not going to happen for her. And once we were married, I knew it would take her a year or so to think about having children. I didn't think she even thought of it. She came up to me one day and said, I think we should have kids. And I said, yeah, I thought you'd come up and say that to me. And Daniel came along, and things were great until he had his regression. And so it's been a whirlwind for all three of us, really. He's had a lot of recovery, but he still has a lot of severe problems. And so that day kind of lives on. It's kind of strange. I think he thinks about it all the time. I think that some days he does okay with it, and other days he doesn't like the fact that it was a big change for him. So that's part of the challenge and part of his needs. And it was good for my friend to say that to me, because I was able to step up a notch to be aware of what his needs are lots more. So it's interesting, and it's also interesting to hear our friends in the parent community to talk about their stories, because it teaches all of us what each of the kids went through and what our spouses went through and what it's like. It really is very interesting.
Well, when I was, I'm Michael Zeitlin. When I was asked to be on this panel, I wondered what the heck we were going to talk about and what we would have to say, and specifically what I would have to say. And now, as we're going, I'm getting the idea that there's really a lot to say. So I'm going to start my remarks on diagnosis by just pointing out the obvious. It's a different world today than it was 20 years ago. Today, about 1 in 100, maybe even a little bit more, or maybe the number is less than 1 in 100 school-age children has is on the autism spectrum. 20 years ago, I don't know the number, but I'm going to make one up, 1 in 25,000. It's a different world in so many respects. When Ryan first showed his symptoms and everything went away, I didn't have a clue that it was autism. I'd heard of autism, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anybody that had it. I didn't know anybody that knew anybody that had it, and it wasn't even. I just thought that Ryan was upset, or something had made him upset. It never occurred to me that it was autism, and it didn't occur to his mother either. And then the question is, well, what about the diagnosis? Well, so Ryan had the onset of autism that we could see, at the age of 2, but he didn't have the diagnosis until at least 4. And so what did that mean for Ryan? Well, it meant no early intervention. It meant no therapy or treatment. And when I think also back to the reactions of the first pediatrician and the second pediatrician and the third pediatrician, one thing about the pediatricians that we had at that time for Ryan, one thing in common was that with regard to Ryan's autism, they were all clueless. And I understand that the world is different for pediatricians today than it was back then too, because I think that everybody is tuned into autism today when practically nobody was. And I know that there are new now guidelines for pediatricians. They're supposed to test for autism at 18 months, and I don't remember what they are, but there are some guidelines for them. There were no guidelines for pediatricians to know anything about autism or to test for it. And so it's totally a different world. But it's clear to me that today, with regard to the question of what about diagnosis, that you want it as soon as possible so that you can deal with it as soon as possible. And I think that's a wonderful difference in the world today compared to the world 20 years ago. And one of my regrets is that Ryan didn't get the benefit of early intervention or early treatment.
Thanks, Michael. I think one thing you said was really important is that there is an awful lot to say. There's a lot to say. It's also interesting to note that what we all have in common is regressive autism. As I was hit with the autism bomb, that's what I call it, at 18 months after typical development, and then losing functional communication and all of the rest of the things that occur when someone has regressive autism. And I can only imagine how difficult it must be for a father, a mother, any parent, when you have a child who acts typically, is cuddly, makes eye contact, and all those types of things, and then they withdraw. And then they wonder what they did. What was the cause? Is it something they did? They may wonder. And there was very little known about autism when I was diagnosed. The prevalence rate was thought to be 1 in 10,000. And now we're talking about 1 in 88, and there are suggestions that even that is understating the situation. So, like what Michael talked about, people just didn't know. They didn't know what it was. Every now and then, occasionally you'd come across someone who was able to diagnose autism, but in those days, diagnosis of autism was tantamount to a sentence, lifetime sentence in an institution. If things went really well, if you were really lucky and everything lined up, possibly you'd be able to go out in some community outings. There was very little known. Fortunately, even though there was no early intervention at that time, was my parents, as I mentioned before, who advocated on my behalf, who convinced the school to take me in about a year. And they provided that early intervention. So what did my parents do? And it was interesting to note, there was no support. There were no dad's panels like this. There weren't any mommy panels either, actually. There was just nothing. However, I do remember sometimes feeling confused about my father or with my father. I think he was confused with me. He didn't know what to do with me. He had his hands full. He had a job and a half, worked full-time, then he had another part-time job. He had my brother to contend with, who was diagnosed with mild to moderate retardation. I think there's some autism thrown in for spice, but people didn't know about these things in those days. They had me. There was my older sister, the oldest of us. I used to think that she got all the neurotypical genes in the family, but as I'm finding out, she's got her things too. But I think in those days, what would have helped is more support for fathers, things like we're doing here, whether it's panels, fathers groups, people like Robert Nassif, who has written books and does workshops specifically for fathers. There's going to be a movie out, a documentary called Autistic Like Me, which is a documentary about fathers and how fathers work through and support each other when their child has autism. So I think if there had been more support for my father and understanding what it was like and what to do with their child on the autism spectrum, that probably would have been very helpful.
Okay, I am looking at the time. This is my job. It's 7:36. So there's so much I want to ask. So if you could condense your answers a little bit, I want to keep this as full and as round as we can for our audience. So try and stay focused on your answers. Maybe cut it down to a 3-minute. That would be good. Each of you have mentioned work. Now I know Michael is a CPA, Phil's a doctor. Scott's a software engineer and Chris is a photographer. Those are very different fields, and I know that there are different stressors put on families by virtue of work. You're out having to, bring the bread home, so to speak. How are you balancing having a child with autism with maybe the stressors that happen at work, providing for the family? What tips would you give fathers in that realm? Maybe some coping strategies that you have found that are helpful to you on a really stressful day.
Well, so as a CPA, I'd have to admit, and anyone would know, that my work is very stressful. And it's stressful for a few reasons. One is that there are deadlines. Maybe some of you have heard of them, like tax deadlines, like financial statement deadlines. So, and my particular field of work is I'm a tax CPA. So I have tax deadlines, and so in the period around just leading up to April 15th, my schedule is get up early in the morning, go to work all day, go home at 10, 11, midnight, 1 a.m. sometimes, go home, go to bed, get up, go back to work, sometimes 6, 7 o'clock. So I'll have days like that. But even when I'm not in tax season, every single day of my life, I have lots of work at the end of the day that needs to be done that I haven't done. So in my work life, I'm in pretty much a constant state of what you might call triage. So I try to do what I think is the most important thing first. I take care of emergencies. I try to work consistently, work regularly. But on top of that, so Ryan's mother and I are divorced. And what that means is that I have time that I spend with Ryan. So for the last many years, I spend every Wednesday night, every other weekend, and a couple of weeks in the summertime with Ryan. And when I have that time, then for all practical purposes, I can't and don't do anything else. So my strategy for dealing with the stress is I just give myself over to the moment. So when I'm working, and I'm concentrating on that. And when I'm spending Wednesday nights or weekends with Ryan, I just forget about all of the other things that I have to do and know that they're waiting for me when I get back to work on Monday or whenever it is. And another thing I do a lot of is apologize. I'm sorry, Mr. Jones. I know you need your tax return yesterday, and I'm working on it today. I have a few questions. Can we work on those? And I'll have it for you as soon as I can. So I do a lot of apologizing. I give myself over to wherever I am in the moment, and maybe in the final analysis, I don't make as much money as I would if I could concentrate on my work all the time. And maybe I'm not as good a dad as I would be if I could be a perfect dad all the time. But I just go back and forth, and I just do the best I can and apologize a lot.
Well, Michael, I have to reiterate there, being in the moment is probably one of the most important things that I found. I have a unique job situation where I actually work in northern Alaska for 2 weeks, and then I'm home here in Colorado for 2 weeks. And I've been doing that for most of my daughter's lives. And so it kind of allows me the opportunity to, when I'm at work, I focus on work because it's a long way away, although I do call. But more importantly, when I'm home, I was always there for them. I went on field trips when they were in school, go to the doctors. I did a lot of things that, a lot of dads couldn't do. And I really enjoyed that. And I felt like it would have been easy to say, well, I'm kind of busy or I'm tired. I don't feel like doing that today. But then I realized very early on that if I had said that, the 2 weeks that I'm home would have gone by, and I'd be back in work, and I'd say, wow, what did I do with my kids on that time home? So it was very on that I said, no, I'm devoting this time to them. They come first, and whatever else that I have to do comes second. So.
Well, let me just begin this way. I walked away from a potentially lucrative commercial career as a commercial advertising photographer in Chicago because I had a father who was absent. He was a federal law enforcement officer, and he was gone most of my childhood. And I knew that I did not want to do that to my children. Now, this was before I had kids. And so this is why I became an educator, is that I wanted to have time to be with children, to have children. And that was with no knowledge of what I was going to be getting into. And the flip side happened. I'm let me just explain, tenure track professor, which means I got a clock, and if I don't do up to what they expect by a certain timeline, I'm dead in the water. They will axe me. This is the way tenure works. And so it's a terrifying process. So, you're a temporary hire for 6 years, right? And I'm actually in my last year now. It's really kind of terrifying. And so it went from high-pressure 80-hour work weeks to high-pressure 80-hour work weeks. And I have to work with these tumultuous, not teenagers, they're young adults, teaching art which makes them even more kind of interesting. By the way, I think most of my students are not neurotypical by this point. I'm absolutely committed to that point now, which is great because I'm a little more understanding with them. It doesn't mean that I'm a great dad in the way that I would like myself to be a great dad. I reincarnate a little bit too much of my own father. He was a Fed cop, he was military, he was a hard ass. I will not even go into the titles that I earned as a child over and over again. And as all parents, we do reenact how we were parented. And living in the moment sometimes for me is not a great idea. It's even better to step back, shut myself down, and think, this little guy, this little girl isn't in control. You know, I have to be in control. The family motto that I have taught them is, I can do anything and I have self-control. And I have to live that every day with them, and I have to live it every day when I go to work. And, you know, when you have a bad A day, and you walk into a class and you hear a college student complain that, oh, I couldn't get my photography done, in a 2-week period of time because I just want to go, are you really kidding me? Like, really, come on, this is photography. They don't deserve it either. So it's very much about stepping back, not letting the moment take control of your anger, your fear, your upsetness, but really joy. These fabulous moments of joy. My daughter is an amazing designer, intuitive, natural, biomorphic designer. And I get into doing the art with her. I get into doing, construction things with my son because he loves the mechanics of things. And fortunately, I've got the greatest job in the world. I'm a professor. So it means I kind of get to make my own schedule. I run the area, so I set the schedule, and I get to spend a lot of time with them. And they are first and foremost. They always have been in my mind, even before we had kids. And I agree. I think that this is one of those absolute keys. And if my boss doesn't understand, which sometimes she does not, my dean fully understands. My president of the university and his wife fully understand. They all have family members with autism. And so there is a network of people above who get it. And you just have to sometimes look at them and go, my kid's having a big A day. And they go, it's okay, go take care of it. People do care. And fortunately, we are at the time we're at now. It's not 20 years ago. They get it.
These are great stories to hear. But I already realized before I heard those stories, I'm not very good at it. I accept Daniel's autism, but I don't like it, and I don't want that to filter into him. I don't want him to think I don't like him. And I feel very guilty all the time. I feel like the worst parent in the world until he's cured. And so, the worst father in the world. He's got a wonderful mother. She works, constantly and does everything for him, and also works her job, which is incredible. And I feel like I should be around him. I should just quit my job and just get the family on public assistance. Why not? There are other people who do that. Just do that, and let's just live in a trailer, and I'll just be with them all day. I would just drive him absolutely 100% crazy. Every morning he wakes up, Daddy, and I'm not there. Sometimes it goes 2 weeks, and I don't see him because I'll be at the office all day, and then I'll do the night shift at the ER. I'll go sleep in the hyperbaric chamber at the office if it's a Saturday, and then I'll wake up at 2 in the afternoon. I'll go, to the gas station to get pork rinds because they're gluten-free, because I'm gluten-free, and then I'll go back in to do another night shift, and then I won't see him again for a while, and then it's Monday, and I figure if I go home and I'm up and then he has to hurry to school, he's going to get confused and think it's a Saturday and all this other stuff. And so, but on the other hand, it's kind of like with my parents. I don't know if this recrudesces. I heard Chris talking about this whole thing sometimes. With my parents, they both worked and they traveled for the same job, and they were out of town for days, sometimes 10 days at a time. And with them, it was quality, not quantity. So I was there for the first time in 2 weeks the other day, and Daniel was eating his breakfast, and he looked up at me, and he wanted me to make one of those stupid guy pal sounds, and I made it back to him. I can't remember which one it was. Drives my wife nuts that I taught him to make all these noises, and we have a great time doing it. And then he couldn't have thought I was more funny just standing there, and he cracked up and put his head in his arms and laughed, and he was having a good morning. And some mornings, it just, I'm like, it's like two cats in a bag, but only worse, you know what I mean? So I've actually learned, though, to make the sounds and kiss him and blow raspberries on his arms and do Three Stooges things with him and things like that when he's all upset and having a meltdown. So, I had to see the eye doctor the other day because of it, but that's okay, it's one of those things. So, from day to day, sometimes I don't know what the hell I'm doing as a parent, and other days I figure I'm okay. He had a meltdown, and I didn't get upset, and, now he's out, swinging, and he's having a good time and wants me to push him, So that's I just take it one day at a time. It drives my wife nuts because she plans things 3 months ahead, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, you can keep the mic. I have a question for you, Phil.
I don't have an answer, but go ahead.
We're going to just bounce around and do some individual questions. And, you already alluded to the fact that you spend a lot of time in your practice, in the ER and in your professional practice. So I'm wondering, for you, how do you separate, where do you draw the line between dad and doctor, where your son's concerned? Is that a difficult thing to do? Is that something that has to be done? I'm sure there are other parents who happen to be doctors that may have children with autism.
Yeah, it is. You have to be careful and make sure I do. Be careful. I'm sort of, I don't want to say a controlling doctor, but I believe the doctor has to be very confident. I mean, to my right is another professional. You have to advise people and tell them what you think. And in theory, they don't know what it is that they need, and you do. But then they make the final decision. So it really is more of an issue with my wife and I of what, she'll sometimes in the middle of a meltdown say, well, what are we going to do about this? You're the doctor. I'll say, well, why don't we talk about it? And I always want to have a chart in front of me and think about what to do and how we rearrange his supplements and did he get a dietary violation and things like that. It's sort of different for me at home that way. And then there's other times when I think that he knows I'm a doctor because he'll come to the office and I do his biomedical treatment, and he'll get, he'll come in and we'll, I used to draw his blood for him because it was hard for him to get that at the lab. So he was the one patient, because I don't draw anybody else's blood, that I would do that. And he was a good boy, and he'd cry, and these big alligator tears would come down. And when I couldn't see as well as I aged, I put glasses on, and the alligator tears got bigger and bigger and bigger. So I realized that it's hard for him. I think it's harder for him as mother, for me being the doctor. And then he ends up being the trailblazer. One of you all were saying, I think, Chris, your daughter was the trailblazer in your family, and then you were kind of ready for your son, even though they're two very different children. If you know them, I've met them, had the privilege of meeting the family and all that. So he's sometimes, because I'm a doctor, he's a trailblazer. And it's helped him sometimes, and other times it's caused him and his mom to throw their hands up and say, this didn't do any good, let's stop doing this. Then we do.
Okay. Chris, you are an artist, so I'm wondering, I know for Scott and I, we've noticed that actually both our children have artistic qualities, and I'm assuming that art plays a role for your children. How do you integrate what you do? Is there something about art that you can bring into your children's treatment that you found helpful that you could maybe share?
Yeah, we do quite a bit of art process with our kids. In fact, my wife and I have been big process artists, our entire lives. I have the philosophy that we are all born to be artists, but we are enculturated to stop thinking that way. I was a conceptual artist at a very young age, and I remember the first time an art teacher told me, well, that's not art, because it wasn't rendered perfectly. And I thought, no, but I did this little great thing on a piece of cardboard and covered it with tinfoil, and the letters say, it is. It was literally the phrase, it is, What a great conceptual piece of work. I wish I still had it to this day. So I encourage my kids to do the same thing. I also encourage them to not let the art be permanent. Don't feel like you have to keep it. Art is a process of living. And so what we do today, we can forget and move on to the next thing tomorrow. A masterpiece is only a masterpiece because somebody else sits back 20 years from now and says, this is brilliant. You live in, again, come back to that same idea. As an artist, you live in the moment. And I think sometimes for them to learn to live in the moment, to recognize, that is really, really key. And to not be afraid of failure, because failure does not exist. To fail is to not do, as far as art goes. And to certainly not feel bad about, a brother coming in and like adapting. In fact, I'll even teach them and get into adaptive art. Well, Maddie will do one piece and Caleb will do another, and then we switch them around. Or maybe I'll go in and I'll, put a scribble or something someplace and, make them learn. Even to the point of learning physicality, understanding materiality, the physics of an object. Watercolor paint, if you ever have tried to do it on a vertical surface, it's really, really hard to do. So, I put it on a board and we start spinning the board and see what happens and put a marker to it and, start thinking around. It's about adaptive creative thinking that I'm pretty sure Caleb's going to be a scientist. I'm absolutely convinced of this. And I think it would be good for him to have that, adaptive consideration, because most of the scientists I work with, they don't have very adaptive thinking.
So your thinking is that art, it helps them adapt, be more flexible, is what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Cool.
I actually, by the way, build my own cameras. I design cameras for the kind of work that I make have done in the past. That's part of that creative adaptive thinking in engineering. So.
Cool. Well, I don't know that many people know that Stephen Shore is a musician, but I know he probably has something to share with us about music and how it worked in his life and how it helps other kids. So could you share a little bit about that, Stephen?
Yeah, I certainly can. Music, that was part of my parents', you might say, early intervention. There was a lot of music. Today we might call it music therapy. And that may be what spurred me on to give music lessons to children on the autism spectrum. And I find a benefit of doing that is the relationship that the parents, both the mother and the father, can have with their child. Because often they may spend a lot of time serving as a substitute therapist, adjunct therapist. Fathers may often spend a lot of time working, as we talked about, and then they come home and may feel that, well, we really need to get to academics or social interaction and things like that we see so many educators working so hard on. But what about the arts? And I find the arts, and being a musician, that's where I focus, I find that whatever seems to scramble the speech centers of the brain tends to leave the musical aspects intact. So you can still access that individual, you can still interact with them musically, whether music becomes the form of communication, or perhaps music can help with communication as a sort of carrier signal. We all know about the therapeutic benefits of music. That's part of the reason that I give music lessons, and probably part of the reason that you involve your kids in art. But what about all the other stuff that the arts do that help us experience what it means to be human, that allows your kids to perhaps communicate with you and others in ways that they otherwise would not be able to? It becomes a great way to communicate. It becomes a great way to develop relationships with others in the community, as an artist, as a musician. Also, music and art is just plain old fun. And finally, I haven't figured out how to teach typical kids yet, so I just stick with the ones on the spectrum. They make a lot more sense.
Okay, well, Phil, you kind of alluded to something earlier around how you and your wife handle treatment decisions. So I'm going to shoot this question actually to Michael and Chris and Scott. When you and your families decide to embark or to investigate a new treatment, how does that look? Michael, you've mentioned you're divorced. I know that your son is older, but at one time I'm sure that, you had those discussions. Maybe you even have them now about your child's treatment. So how does that work maybe for a family where mom and dad aren't together, but of course their focus is their child? And Scott and Chris, how does your family approach, decide on a treatment, investigate it? What does that look like? And what tips would you give to dads that maybe make that process smoother And we'll start down here because you got the mic already, and I'll pass this down.
Sure. Yeah, well, I guess I could give the short answer and say I just do whatever my wife wants to do, because she knows a lot more about most things than I do. But no, when you talk about different treatment options, and for us in this room, we might not call them fringe treatments, but maybe typical narrow-minded AMA doctors might call HBOT or vitamin therapy or GFCF, fringe type treatments. And but my attitude about those is, because we've probably all heard certain stories of people saying, well, I did this for my son, and bang, he's cured now. And we all just say, oh man, I got my fingers crossed, I want that to work for my child as well. So unfortunately, it is a small group that those different types of treatments make that dramatic a difference for. But nevertheless, my attitude was, well, I want to try it. And what's the downside? Well, the downside of doing GFCF is, wow, it's really a pain and inconvenience and cooking and that sort of thing. But hey, it's not going to hurt me to do that. Some of the other downsides are, like I said, inconveniences, and the next one is probably money. I mean, vitamin therapy can be kind of expensive, and HBOT treatments can certainly add up and be expensive, and you have to look at your budget and say, what can I do? And because I haven't found a real, other than money, and I don't really consider inconvenience that much of a big deal, but you have to say, what can I do? And do one thing at a time. If I could make a suggestion, is do one thing at a time, and then document what you're doing and the progress it's made and what you see, so that you can quantify those results. And then, if it works, great, maybe tweak it some more. If it doesn't, okay, I'll check that off the list, and we'll move on to the next one. Yeah, I don't know, I'm open-minded to trying, because I feel like, like Philip was saying, you got to try something. You want to do something because you want to help them.
I'm going to reflect what Scott said. I married a woman who is 10 times smarter than me, and I'm darn lucky for it. She does a lot of background research on it, and part of it is that I'm sort of a bullywagger. I grew up with extremely severe asthma and allergies, and I was a walking pincushion most of my childhood. And at a certain age, I think it was around 11, I said, that's it, no more, I'm not going to get stuck again, and I didn't. And so I've just pushed my way through asthma attacks, running marathons, literally the kind of thing that would drop most people dead makes me fight harder. I probably would enact that on my kid. And so Jackie makes me sit back and think about it, and she will pull this information in front of me and say, I think we really need to do this. Okay, so why should we do this, honey? And she lays the reasoning out, and so we try it. But as Scott also said, a lot of it comes down to money. We're on a tight budget. We cannot take care of our children if we're totally broke. We can't keep a house over their heads if we spend our entire funds trying to do treatments that fly us all over the country. We're in Utah. We're in northern Utah, which is pretty darn remote. I thought I was actually going to move to a place that was more progressive than Mississippi. Not a whole lot much more progressive as far as our pediatricians go. They could really use a lot of education, Philip. A lot of education, please. We really need it. So the decision then becomes more that, we try these things, and again, to reiterate what Scott said, the scientific methodology, one thing at a time. And if we do run into an infraction, if we do see an inconsistency, fortunately, as a photographer, I'm half scientist, half artist. I operate under the scientific method all the time, that we sit back and we analyze what exactly has gone on, what the chemistry that has been introduced to our child has been, what the life situations are, what food has happened. Lord knows if we take them to McDonald's one too many times, well, I think there's probably soy in McDonald's, so we get a severe food infraction there. But I trust Jackie tremendously. She is very, very smart, very, very brilliant, and I don't know what I could do without her in this process.
Such a good question. So what do you do when you're divorced and you have to consider treatments? And I have a really obvious and good answer. It requires communication and cooperation. That's all there is to it. If you have communication and cooperation, then you can try treatments and things will work out. So I'll start with a success story. I'd say about 10 years ago, we discussed whether Ryan should be on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. And before that discussion, Ryan's favorite food in the world was pizza. Lots of gluten, lots of dairy. He loved pretzels, and he loved anything with gluten and anything with dairy. Those were his favorite foods. And 10 years ago, gluten-free was not yet a fad. Anyway, we tried it. We tried gluten-free and dairy-free. And first to do it, we had to figure out what was left to eat. And in fact, there are a lot of things. There are all kinds of things, but we didn't know what any of them were. And so when we discovered things, we would tell each other, and we would say, buy this product, this is a great product, this is a great, well, at that time it was really hard to go to restaurants, but this is a great restaurant to maybe go to. And through cooperation and communication, it worked really well. And Ryan has been on the gluten-free, dairy-free diet for I'm going to say 10 years, because I don't really remember. And right away, we noticed an improvement in Ryan's behavior when he was on the diet. He didn't have meltdowns, and he wasn't so nervous, and he wasn't hyped up, and he was calmer and happier. And so we got a great benefit, and all we had to do was figure out how to get him on and keep him on the diet, and it worked very well. And we've noticed when by mistake, so Ryan doesn't honor property rights. So if you've got a donut in front of you and he can get it, he'll eat it. And so sometimes he would just eat things that he wasn't supposed to, and sometimes people would give him things that they want to be helpful. Here, have this brownie. Well, so from time to time he would have things with gluten, and a not unusual consequence would be that the day that he had the food he wasn't supposed to have, he'd be up all night. Not atypical. So we really learned that once we were on the diet, that we had to stick to it, and because it made a difference, and he's been on it for a long time. So here's one of the really good outcomes of this whole thing. We have a pizza place in the Denver area called Bojo's Pizza, and Ryan and I started going there on a regular basis because they have gluten-free pizza with dairy-free cheese, and he loved it. So we went there all the time, and I got to be very friendly with the manager of the Bojo's at Colorado Boulevard and Yale. And as time went on, the manager would come and sit with Ryan and me and was interested in autism, and I explained what autism was, and I explained about Ryan's diet, and that a reason we went to Bojo's so often was because of the gluten-free, dairy-free pizza. And then I became president of the Autism Society of Colorado, and we decided to try a program at Bojo's Pizza. And so once a month on Wednesday nights, the first Wednesday of every month, we started having Bojo's Pizza Night for the Autism Society, and people started coming. And I thought that it would be families with children who had autism, and families did come. But here's the interesting thing: it became a mecca for ASPs. It became this is the place where you can go where everybody knows your name. And so it was the combination of that, and it grew from nothing to really a lot of people coming every Wednesday night to Bojo's Pizza. And then it grew from 1 restaurant to 2 restaurants, and then 3 restaurants, and then Bojo's made some very nice contributions to the Autism Society of Colorado, and we made a great video about Bojo's Pizza Night, and it all came from Ryan's gluten-free, dairy-free diet. I also have another story. Earlier on, the question was, Ryan now has a diagnosis of autism. What do we do next? So back then, there was a program at the University of Colorado run by Dr. Salary Rogers, who's become, I think, pretty famous and moved to California later on. But she was here in Denver, and they had an intensive all-day program, and it cost $50,000 a year 20 years ago to have your kid in that program. Or you could go to regular school and be in a class with typical peers. Well, on this question, there wasn't communication and cooperation. I wanted Ryan to go to Sally Rogers' program, and his mom wanted him to go to school and be with typical peers. He went to school and was with typical peers. And sometimes I wonder, whether he would have gotten some benefit from being in the intensive program, but we'll never know. So the real answer is communication and cooperation.
I just want to say Joyce and I never fight. We have a perfect marriage and everything's perfect. She's 4'10.5". When she was 28 years old, she ran the Newark airport, the whole airport, all the operations of the continental part, which is about 85% of it. She's not easy to tell, we need you to do this. She's like, the only person when she's in the room, I don't care how many people in the room, they're outnumbered. You know what I mean? So it's just, I just had to say that.
Yeah, communication is so important. Communication with your spouse, communication with the child, and understanding that you as a father, you as mothers, you know your children better than anybody else. And you've got to listen to yourselves. You know what they need. And making sure that whomever you're interacting with, whether it's a doctor, a teacher, a therapist, or other person, being as involved as possible in your child's intervention, in your child's treatment. And I think in doing that, that will help promote success on a number of levels. One of the challenges we do face, and Michael touched upon this, is that what we do in autism is temporal in time. And what that means is that you can't go back and redo it. You can't say, well, ABA for the past 6 years didn't work, so let's go back and try Miller method or TEACH or floor time. So we need to educate ourselves as well as possible as to what's out there and matching treatment and intervention to needs. And sometimes it requires being in that professionals, be it teacher, doctor, or whomever, being in their face and making sure you work with them or that they work with you.
The one thing I said you couldn't say it was all me. The next question I wanted to ask I don't think everyone some people have only children. For those that have more than one child in their family, I'm wondering how you deal with, do you have worries around the relationship between the siblings, the typical sibling and the sibling who has autism, what that's going to look like, what it might mean when you're gone? What are the father's concerns? And do you have ideas on fostering good relationships, or how do you deal with that with your children? We'll start with, let's see, who's got more than one child? I know Scott does. Chris.
Yes, as I mentioned, I have two daughters. Yes, as the daughters are young and they're growing up, they're little kids, so your concerns are different at the time. But you realize one day they're going to be older, and you hope that they're going to get along well, and the concern is not only for your daughter with autism or your child with autism, it's for your neurotypical child as well. We probably spend as much time thinking about her as the other daughter. You don't want to burden them, especially in their early adult years, their 20s, when they're, want to see the world and go do their thing and just, get out and explore the world. So it's very important for us not to burden our other daughter with that responsibility. When you get into your 30s, particularly late 30s, you're settling down, you're having a family of your own, and then caring, somewhat caring, it depends on the need, but for a sibling isn't as much of a burden at that time. And, eventually, my wife and I won't be around, and, we are trying to prepare financially, obviously, the best that we can, so that our neurotypical daughter can have the certain financial needs and not have to burden herself with that, to provide some assistance for our autistic daughter. But it is something that, we think a lot about it. There's no doubt about that. And sometimes we don't want to think about it, to be honest with you. It's a little sad sometimes, but you got to take it a day at a time and have a plan and just do your best and say, okay, this is the best I can do, and life is just going to have to move on.
Okay, so remember 6 and 5. You put any 6 and 5-year-old together who are siblings, and they're pretty much going to beat the living daylights out of each other. I had 3 older sisters who were the bullies in the neighborhood, and so I got to be the punching bag, plus, all that. It's a big concern for us. And we drove from Logan, Utah to Denver today. And it's always an adventure to take a car ride with those two, because invariably they're going to fight like cats and dogs. One's going to be upset because the other one didn't give him a toy. I don't know if it's neurotypical or it's not neurotypical, but it is a constant battle. But part of it too is that, and I will blame my wife for this one. When we were going to have Caleb, she said, I'm praying for a velvet steamroller because we need somebody who can calmly work with Maddie. Oh man, she got her velvet steamroller. He is calm, he is calm, he is calm, and all of a sudden you get hit by him. And that happens with Maddie too. She is constantly frisky. She's going for it all the time. She's egging him all the time. He'll take it, and all of a sudden he'll hit her full on. And, what do you do with that? So we are always thinking about the fact that ultimately they will be responsible for each other. Like Scott said, we're not going to be around all the time. And I come from a big Catholic family and a big Southern Baptist family, and the feelings and the beliefs are that family is paramount. It is absolutely central. And so we talk to them all the time, and we make them apologize. We've done it from basically the beginning, that they have to come up, they have to hug each other and say, I'm sorry. If they were the ones who had victimized one of them, it's I'm sorry. And the other one has to say back, I forgive you. And they have to hug. I mean, that's no matter how mad they are or not, they have to do it. And if they're screaming the response out, they have to try to say it as calm as possible, because it will start to help them learn to do it as a habit. Kids who are not neurotypical need habits. You know, I suspect that my kids are probably going to end up with a diagnosis of Asperger's, and habits are a really good thing, especially constructive habits. And, you know, if they're going to have social difficulty issues, they need to fix it at home first before they go outside. You know, I always ask them, you know, you just did this thing. How would you like it if your sibling did this to you? How do you think your friends are going to feel if you do this to them? Constantly developing, and I know at this point they're still not thinking in that framework, but I think the more I talk to them, the more I repeat to them that idea, the more they will develop into that kind of mindset. And, you know, it's really critical, because neither one of them is neurotypical. So they're going to survive together, or they're going to go down apart. So.
Well, Joyce and I only have Daniel. He's the only, and we get concerned of what's going to happen when we're gone and all that kind of thing. And so, you know, some members of our family are supportive of him, and some really aren't. I always tell the patients that come to our office, you're the 1 millionth customer. Here, you've won a prize. It's my family. Here it is. You can't get it. I can't return it. The two family members that really do a lot for Daniel, one's older and really physically can't do a lot, and she's just very supportive of what we do. The other one is sort of an Aspergery bachelor, and he, again, can't directly do things, but he's also supportive of what we do. And when we told the family members that Daniel, who would have a pile of half-chewed, half-spat-out food at his ankles and everybody else's ankles after every meal, because he would suck the flavor out of it and spit it out. When we told the other family members about it, when we told the one guy with the Asperger one, he said, "Oh, I just thought he was cute," you know, because he was still a toddler and all that. So we, you know, we're fearful of what's going to happen, you know, both financially and who would really look out for him. We do have designated family members, and I think they'll watch over him. You know, over the years, you meet people and you think that that's a good person who would help orchestrate things properly, and I think that's all you can do. And put a lot of money away. It's all you can do. And put it in something that can help your child, you know. And it's been hard for us because we were running around the country doing all these different things, and you know, now we're a little bit more budget minded. And my wife's miraculous at getting the county and the educators and people to do things that they're supposed to do, so that, you know, he gets what he's entitled to. So. There's a lot of things that we want to do. Our fear is when he's around 40, we're going to be too old, too sick, or too dead to take care of him. So, you know, it's planning, and it's hard to do. And some financial advisors help with that, and some don't know what they're doing. It's very difficult and very challenging. You have to. It's hard to think about that when your kid's having a meltdown and that pizza that you just brought home that he loves, he throws on the wall or whatever. At our house, you can eat off the floor sometimes, and it's not as much as it used to be. And that's because over here there's the pizza, over there's the apple, you know. So sometimes it's hard when you're in the middle of the whirlwind to plan for the future. But the key is, what you're hearing from everybody, is you have to.
So personally, I have only one child, my son Ryan, who's 21. But I have hundreds of accounting clients, tax clients in my CPA practice. So it's not surprising that some of my clients have multiple children, one or more of whom has disabilities. So I have the experience of knowing, and my typical client is a client forever. So I have many clients for more than 10 years or more than 20 years. I have some for 30 years. So I see it all. And what tends to happen when there's a child in the family with disabilities, in my anecdotal experience, is that the child with disabilities gets all the resources. And there aren't resources for the typical kids. And it's a problem for everybody. And I can only imagine really what a problem it is for the typical child whose brother or sister is getting all the family resources. I'm thinking of one anecdotal story that came up in my practice. My client was in my office with his oldest son, who was already 20-something and already working and making money. And the father asked his son, "When I die, what's going to happen with my money?" And the oldest son said, "We're going to take care of the youngest son because he has disabilities and he needs it." And that was the answer he was supposed to give, and he gave that answer, and that was the answer in that family. I don't know what the right answer is, but it tends to happen. But now I'm going to tell you about another family, the Greenfeld family. The Greenfeld family consisted of the father, Josh, and the mother, whose name is Fumi, and their two children, Noah and Carl. And Noah has severe autism. Josh was and is a professional writer, and he wrote great books, and he wrote movies, and he's done some wonderful things. And Fumi, the mother, is an artist and an author, and she also has written some wonderful things. So when Noah was a little boy, when he was a baby, Josh started writing diaries. So every single day, he would make notations of what happened that day. And most of the notations were all about life with Noah, the child with severe autism. And his collection of diaries were compiled into several wonderful books. And then when Noah was older, Fumi wrote a wonderful book. Hers was a novel about life with a child with autism. And then Carl grew up to be an incredibly talented writer as well. And he wrote a wonderful book about life in his family. He was the sibling, the brother of a boy with severe autism, where in their family, the resources went to the child with autism. And his book is called Boy Alone. It was published in 2009, and it's just an incredible book. So why am I telling you about this? Well, a couple of years ago, when I was the president of the Autism Society of Colorado, I had an idea that there ought to be a play about life with autism. And I contacted somebody in Denver, a very creative, wonderful artist named Norma Moore, who is the founder of a wonderful group we have here in Denver called Stories on Stage. And we made a deal, and she wrote an incredible play called The Autism Chronicles. And she wove the stories written by Josh and Fumi and Carl into a play that we call The Autism Chronicles. And when you see The Autism Chronicles, you really understand what it felt like to be the father, the mother, and the sibling of a child with severe autism who grows to be an adult with autism. And you all have the opportunity to see this play because we're presenting it right here, Saturday night, 7:30. So I hope you will all come. Autism Chronicles, 2 nights from tonight, right here.
Wonderful stories and wonderful examples from 4 fine dads. So as I think about relationships that fathers and mothers have with their children, and you all touched on this in some manner or other, how do we balance the needs of the child with autism with the other siblings, with the typical siblings? The child with autism getting various therapies and this and that and various resources, and how can I be fair to my other child? And I think it requires looking at what the word fair means and what the word fair, maybe what it doesn't mean. So if we take another example, here we have Teresa over here, and as we're talking, God forbid, she turns blue and falls out of her chair. She's in cardiac arrest. That's right, Phil. Phil gets up right away. He's trained. He's a doctor. We've got other doctors here. So Phil's about to conduct his business and revive Teresa, and suddenly he puts his hand on his head and says, "Oh, I could have had a V8." No, he doesn't say that. Well, what he does say is, "Teresa, I'm really sorry. I can't help you. Because if I help you, well, I don't have time to give everybody else CPR and get out before midnight. So I'm not going to do it." So is that fair? Treating everybody equally. And that's sometimes I see what parents struggling with. How do I make it up to my other children? And I think what we really need to look at is providing for needs. What are the needs of the individual with autism? What are the needs? Just as equally important as the typical siblings, or perhaps other siblings that may be atypical, but they still may not need as much as the child with autism. And if I think of a parent can honestly say and look a kid in the eye, the typical child, and say, well, if you needed speech therapy, if you needed whatever procedure that needed to be done, I'd do it for you too. And I think if we look at the idea that different people have different needs, and we're going to have to treat them differently, and really what is fair is providing for the needs of everybody. Thank you.
Because he needs another hat.
I wear many hats.
I know I'm a mom, and this is the dad's panel, but my youngest daughter is standing at the back there, Deanna, and she often hears stories in our family around relationships. Stephen touched on this, and I think parenting to the need is really a good idea, because what Deanna doesn't remember but knows is she had life-threatening asthma before our daughter Rachel was diagnosed, and we parented to the need, and Deanna had an asthma attack, and she needed whatever it was. She needed a trip to the emergency room, a shot of steroids, whatever was going to get her through. That's what we did, because that's what was needed right then. And when Rachel was diagnosed, she got the resources. So it's a conversation we've had in our family, and I think our sibling panel, it'll be interesting to listen to SIBS, which Deanna is going to be on, talk about how they look at that a little bit around what Stephen was saying. How do siblings feel about it? How do they sort out their feelings around their sib maybe getting a lot of attention? How do they sort through their feelings? They're going to have feelings about it. So thanks for bringing that up, Stephen. Well, let's see. Are we into our lightning round? Yes, we are. Larry says yes, we are. But we have a half hour. I was going to do something novel. It says till 9. I'm sorry. Did you guys not want to stay till 9? I was going to throw one question out to you, and then we were going to have a wrap-up question to the dads. If there was one thing they could condense, like in 60 seconds, to say, what would it be? But I'm just wondering, for all the dads out there, since this is about you, is there a question I forgot that you're just dying to ask the dads up here? Don't be shy. Raise your hands. Really? We did that well? Oh, there we go. Stand up. No? Speak loudly. So for those who couldn't hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, our children are vulnerable, and how do you protect them through the various stages, the various different protective needs? How do you go about that? Any one of you can take that, or all?
My response was to be somewhat overprotective, and some of that was, I think some people I wanted to just kill them, and if they were bullying my kid or they made fun of him or something, and then you want to see your kid. But Joyce and I are both strict parents, and before he regressed, we wanted him to be courteous and do this and do that. And then he was very sensitive, and he would cry a lot, and sometimes we needed to protect him from us a little bit, not because we were bad parents, but because that was too hard for him. And there were some things that were very challenging for him to do. Sometimes you protect them from the school district and the county. That's why Joyce isn't here. They tried to pull a fast one, which is a big mistake with her, because she saw it right away. And then as a father, you feel like the guy that comes out of the cave in the Neanderthal days with a big club, and you want to enact that on everybody. Other times you feel that way when you want your child to have friends and you want the other kids to play with, with your son in my case. And so I think, you kind of have to just moderate that a little bit. Joyce moderates me, because I would just like to, just be in the face of the school district people and so on and so forth. And it's mostly adults, I think, that have given Daniel a hard time, that I've been protective of him about. And the other kids have been pretty good about it. There's a few kids that are not really, they most of that time when they realize something's different about him, I think they just either kind of get out of the way and let him do his thing, or they just don't interact with him, or they kind of bend a little or a lot for him. All the girls in school have a crush on him because he's so, beautiful. He has blue eyes and red hair, and it was a big deal for who got to eat lunch with him when he was at the school with the neurotypical kids, things like that. And as he gets older and other people understand him less and less, but they understand that something's different, I think they accommodate him. It's more the system that I end up fighting for him, and I think that's it. Joyce does a good job of keeping those instances to a minimum, pretty much. I'm always in an angry mood about it, though. I just always am. I always want to protect him from what's out there, and because I think there's more ahead, and I don't think other people are going to look out for him. We're not in a friendly country for autistic children and adults, I don't think. And I'm not trying to be negative or pessimistic. I think what the gentleman brings out in me to say is that you always have to be on your guard to be ready to do that. And my wife's better at it than I am because she's more positive about it, and she's just proactive and gets things done. I just want to go kill everybody, but I know that the best way to deal with it is just to make it clear that if someone's not accommodating him properly, and I don't just mean the school district and things like that, I just mean if somebody's not fair to him. We did it in an emergency department. I'm going to talk about that on Sunday. I'm not exempt from all these things that happen that go wrong with kids when they approach the conventional medical system. Dr. Kaplan's PhD is on that very entity to a large degree, and so on. So these are, it's all about protecting our kids sometimes. I think when you hear people say they had to fight the school district, or they want their pediatrician to hold on the vaccines, or they need others to understand that he needs his supplements just like the next kid needs their seizure medicine, we're really protecting the kids.
I'm going to reinforce some of what he said, which is the overprotectiveness. My kids have never been in the ER, which for a 6-year-old is kind of crazy. They've never broken legs or arms, and I'm like always there hovering, warning, and so Jackie refers to me as Safety Sally. In fact, it's sort of a joke within my professional career that I've always been the Safety Sally around. Well, it extends to my kids too. I try to think about what life was like for me as a kid. And I grew up in a very rough environment, not only with my dad, but in the neighborhood, where I was not typical. And I'm not going to say that I'm diagnosed. I'm not diagnosed. But I clearly was not typical. And I got bullied a lot. And I developed into the adolescent who became the bully of the bullies. When the little kid got the swirly in the toilet, The bully found his head in that same toilet the following day and for the next 6 weeks. And I was not a big kid. I was just really mean. It wasn't a good outcome. You know, my early adult years and my late teen years were tough. I was the person you didn't want to run into. I was the punk rocker with a shaved head, combat boots, and a big attitude. So with Caleb, he's got my rage. And I try to work very, very hard with him to be patient with other people, to have grace. That's why when we talked about the conflict between siblings, showing compassion, showing love, trying to get violence out of their lives. You know, he asks me about bullies. How do I handle bullies, Dad? And I look at him, I say, you know, Caleb, think about it. Somebody bullies you because they are hurt. Maybe you need to develop a friendship with them. Ask them what's going on. Figure it out. Now, he's verbal. But if you're not verbal, honestly, I have no idea. You know, like Philip said, I'd love to just, go after him. I'd love to go after the parents for letting this child grow up to be such an awful person to pick on somebody who's vulnerable. But society won't let that happen. And fortunately, we do have a culture that is getting to be more sensitive. I'm shocked. I get to photograph people like crazy all over the place. And I'm really amazed at a younger generation who is sensitive. It's less about the class pet. It's more about them figuring out that these are really cool people. Let's hang out with them, like Philip was saying about his son in the lunchroom. I don't know that we're ever going to avoid the jerks out there. And I don't know if we're ever going to avoid the jerks' parents, other than setting them down, literally in a conflict resolution meeting and saying, look, this is what is going on. This is what your child is doing. These are the actions that we potentially can take. Please try to stop this before we have to go any further with it. Call them on the legal carpet before it gets out of control. That'll scare anybody. Your kid, if they become the bully like I was as a kid, will get kicked out of school today. Back in the 80s, they just chalked it up. I would walk into the principal's office. He'd go, you did it again? Yep, I did. Was it a bully? Yep, it was. He'd go, fine, sit down right there. 5 minutes later, all right, Chris, go back to class. Sweet, see you tomorrow. A different day. Caleb's not going to live that way. So I'm prior service, light infantry. I'm trying to teach my kids to be pacifists because I don't think they can figure it out. I don't think they can balance violence. So it's a lifestyle choice for us. Maddie, and I'll segue a little bit here. Maddie, I'm less concerned about being bullied. She's more likely to be victimized because she is complacent to her peers. She likes to make them happy, and she does it through mirroring. But Maddie, I'm much more worried about as a teenager getting taken advantage of by young men. And I'm going to tell you, I have no idea how to do this. I mean, maybe I'm going to drag her into church and teach her, all sorts of things about Jesus just to make sure that she is protected here. I don't know. And I wish I did have an answer to that. That's the one that really scares the dickens out of me.
Michael, did you have something to add real quick? 2 minutes.
So I'm aware that for Aspies are, so there's a term that I've heard for Aspies, and it's called bully magnet. And I know that it's true, and it's one of the sad things, and the best answer I would have for that is awareness is great. And there's a new movie called Bully, and I actually went to see it. And I think that the more awareness there is of bullying, the better everyone will be. As for my personal case, my son has severe autism. And so he's had his whole life 24/7 care. So in terms of protecting him from bullies, there's never been a need, never been a problem. But the problem is, what's going to happen when he's 50 or 60 or 70? And the best answer I have for that is that I have to be healthy and rich and outlive him. And what a pathetic answer is that. Because in the real world, in the rest of the world, the worst thing for a parent is to outlive a child. But in the severe autism community, maybe not.
Well, because I answered a lot of these questions when I was with my Autism Society chapter, I wanted to give maybe some practical advice that we learned over the years in our chapter, and some of which we helped create. Safety is a huge issue, especially for our nonverbal kids. Some of the things that we found in the way of resources, some of the community center boards actually offer not lessons, workshops for people with disabilities to learn the signs around what is a safe situation, what does an unsafe situation look like. It's important to have dialogue with your children, to start teaching them that sort of thing. It's not one talk, it's a very long conversation. It's one I still have with my 22-year-old. Look around you when you walk out to the parking lot. She works at Dairy Queen. It's dark sometimes when she has to walk out in that parking lot. Carry your keys between your fingers. Look around. Is there anybody following you? Is there somebody around? Lock your doors when you get in the car. Don't answer it's all the common sense stuff we teach to our typical children, but it has to be reinforced over and over. And I don't think, I think there are resources that maybe people aren't aware of. There's also the police station in Boulder actually offered some courses to help people with developmental disabilities around how to make a 911 call, how to recognize a safe bus stop from a non-safe bus stop. So I would encourage you to call around. I think there are some things out there that you may not be aware of. There's also a lot you have to create, and it has to be a continual conversation. Because I do think that what Michael is saying is the reality that we all worry about. We worry about our children being taken advantage of, and the reality is they are. So we have to do our very best and find what resources there are and try to create them where they don't exist. I wanted to read something before I make our closing session announcements. Stephen's been posting on his Facebook, which was kind of cool actually, about tonight's session. And so he put out a post saying, I'm sitting on a father's panel, and while I'm not a dad, I do have a lot of experience having one. What is the most important thing we can do to support fathers of children with autism? And a gentleman wrote in, and he said, fathers of kids with ASD need structured support. We have no control of our kids' health. We are at the mercy of the system, and we don't know how to handle it most of the time. It is so painful, and yet we have no one to turn to, and many are too proud or too scared to ask for help. They don't know where to go. I guess what I would say, and I know Michael would reiterate this because we both have been associated with Autism Society chapters. I'm proud to be associated with the U.S. Autism and Asperger's Association. Call us. We're here for you. You're talking to parents who've been down that same road, and we'll try to help you find the resources. We don't care if you're a mom or a dad, and we may not have all the answers, but I kind of think if we stick together, we can either create the answer, or we can at least support each other and hear each other's story and know when we've had a bad day and we need a shoulder sometimes. There are places to go. Pick up the phone and call an Autism Society organization and find out more about the resources available in your area. They exist, and there are many organizations out there. I wanted to close out by introducing Dr. Larry Kaplan, our founder. He has a couple of announcements to make, and I think then we're probably at our 9 o'clock mark.
Thank you, Teresa, and everybody on the panel. I was actually supposed to be on this panel, but I guess they have me doing a few things around here. With the conference, I do want to let you know that we will start promptly at 8:15 tomorrow morning. The room in back of you as you walk through here, and of course all the exits and entrances will be coming through where you registered. So When you go out through the exhibit hall and then you come back in the exhibit hall, this is, if you look at the sessions on the schedule, this is the one in the middle. The one on the left is our main general session where we'll all meet tomorrow morning. And then the one on the right is in this, that's track 3, that's in the steamboat room. And when you walked all the long way down here, you pass the steamboat room. So hopefully you'll be able to find all the rooms. We'll have an opening message tomorrow, so we'll kind of go over all the details on what's going on. We would just have an absolutely incredible conference the next 2-3 days ahead of us. Stephen, Dr. DeMio, Chris are all going to be either on, they're all going to be speaking in their own sessions and also on panels too throughout the day. But thank you to all of you. And Teresa, you'll see her throughout the conference. I'll be moderating panels and many panels. So thank you for all coming tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you to all our fabulous dads and all our dads and moms that came.